Welcome to Wild Turkey Science, a podcast made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow. I'm Dr. Marcus Lashley, Professor of Wildlife Ecology at the University of Florida.
And I'm Dr. Will Gulsby, Professor of Wildlife Ecology and Management at Auburn University. We're both lifelong hunters and devoted scientists who are passionate about hunting, managing, and researching wild turkeys.
In this podcast, we'll explore turkey research, speak to the experts in the field, and address the difficult questions related to wild turkey ecology and management.
Our goal
is to serve as your connection to wild turkey science. Well, Steve, I'm going to call you Steve now. Because you keep getting comments about how you sound
how about
like
Ranella
Steve.
Jr.?
Yeah, Steve Ranella.
Steve, if you want to have us on, I can be your voice brother.
Yes.
Apparently.
You know, that would be kind of cool.
They wouldn't know who's talking.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
Just listen for the smart one.
It is funny,
it's
though.
It's not me.
there have been multiple comments now that I have seen, and you've told me about a couple, about how you sound like Steve Ranella.
I think it's the way we choose our words. And the way we articulate our thoughts. I mean, I feel like he has a very thoughtful demeanor when he podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, you shouldn't be so hard on him. Okay. So we've been talking about predation for a while, and I know for a fact that our audience, there are quite a few people that feel like they've been on an emotional roller coaster.
Right.
And I think that is fair.
And some of them have ended up on a hilltop, and I think some of them have landed in a valley.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to start out by reminding everybody what our objective was here.
Well, that was going to be my first question for you is, what was our objective of this episode series?
Well, I think for me, what I was trying to accomplish with that series, and we got some really good scientists on to do this, is to challenge us to think about predation, you know, as broadly and thoroughly from different angles as possible. I've never heard the argument essentially laid out from different perspectives, and I think that we did that pretty well.
Yeah.
And people felt like it was an emotional roller coaster. Didn't matter where your opinion started.
Yeah.
We presented information that may have supported and refuted that through those episodes, and that was kind of the point. Is we want you to hear what the different perspectives are, and that's not easy for me to do. I think I've gotten some feedback from several people that that essentially were like, "Man, I didn't like hearing that," or "I really liked hearing this." We're in that same space where we've kind of developed over time, as scientists, a position on things. And this whole process really challenged that for me, which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
But it makes me uncomfortable. And I don't think people out there realize that we're trying to give you the whole perspective, and we're not necessarily endorsing any particular thing on the air, by airing someone who has a difference of opinion. We're not endorsing that opinion necessarily. We want to share the whole story with you.
Yeah, it definitely very much, we just talked about the roller coaster a second ago, and I felt like I was on that roller coaster for a lot of this, and I don't know whether I'm up or down at the end of it, to be honest with you. I feel like I'm stuck in a loop-de-loop a little bit, but I mean, the reason that you and I mean, we've talked a little bit about our backgrounds and what motivated us to choose these careers on the air before. And for me, and for both of us, that was really to learn how to be an effective land manager for game species and how to educate others on how to do that.
Yeah.
And so I came into this viewing it as, let's give them the information that they can use to make the decisions themselves on what they want to do. And when they choose to make those decisions, what are their realistic expectations, the outcomes associated with those decisions? Right. And I think we did that. I feel like we covered, like you said, both grounds. We, most people, I think, understand that if you don't have habitat, regardless of predator, densities or community compositions, you don't have birds or you don't have deer, or you don't, habitat's the foundation of everything. And I think a lot of people appreciate that. One of the things that we did try to do, especially in the episode with Dwayne, which I recently listened back to, is that help people understand when we talk about making sure all of your habitat issues are addressed first and you've got everything that you need present on your landscape first, what that looks like in reality, because there's a lot of people, I think, that have just never had the opportunity to hear, what are all the things, the pieces of that puzzle that should be in place to support survival and reproduction of those species before you start looking at other potential avenues to further enhance that.
Yeah. No, I think that is a really good point. And I've gotten a whole bunch of, especially on Instagram, that's where the audience, I guess, is most actively interacting with me. And I try to get back to everybody. And it's hard, especially, it's been hard on this, as you know. We've gotten so much feedback, mostly positive. Honestly, I wasn't expecting that. But a lot of people appreciated what we were trying to do, and I think most people understand that we're trying to give you the whole story, and not necessarily censor storylines that don't fit with our own personal viewpoints. But one thing that the reason I got onto that, I've gotten feedback over by and large over the same line of thinking, which is, we need you to tell us how to do this. I got it. I understand we don't have any poult rearing cover. I understand, that what the associated variability and expectations and how to temper those from a practice like trapping. But we need to know what we can do in our particular situation. And then, as you know, that situation varies widely based on whether or not people have access to land that they own or access to some of these tools on the land that they have, that they can hunt on. And I think that's something that we're going to have to lean into hard, is try to lay out a foundation of these concepts and the application of those.
How to do it.
Yeah, how do you do this, and how does the context that you're in change the way that you integrate these different things?
Yeah.
So we need to do that really directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that I'll go ahead and add, you and I know that but the audience doesn't. We've got so much feedback in some particular topic areas that we've already started trying to get particular people on the show to walk you through how to do X, Y, or Z. One of those that we've gotten or at least I've gotten overwhelming feedback about, is what does poult rearing cover look like, and how do we make it? And in these different contexts, so we're going to get the best in the business back on the show to talk about that. He's already agreed. It's just a matter of us getting him on, but we're going to try to do that as a bonus episode. And we've already also been recording some other updates on projects that'll be bonus episodes. So those of you that can't get enough of the content, which is quite a few people actually, I think we're up to at least 11 or 12 listeners now, which is pretty impressive. We're in double digits.
Yeah. My extended family started listening last week.
Yeah. My cousin, they just got an iPhone. So there have been quite a few people that tell us what they think is wrong with this podcast.
Yeah.
Which we get plenty of ideas on what's wrong with it. But what they really think is wrong with it is that we don't put off enough content. They run out, and then they don't have anything to listen to for the whole week, which is really, rewarding, I guess.
Right.
That there are some people out there that are really enjoying this. So, that helps us justify using our time to do all of this, and hopefully it's carrying all the way to the resource, which is our point. But
circling back to something you said just a second ago about listener feedback on this episode series, the other major theme that a lot of people who reached out to me shared was that they felt like some of the habitat management, especially the intensive habitat management topics that we kind of wove throughout this series, even though that wasn't a direct focus, we kept alluding back to its importance and its relative contribution to turkey densities versus predator control. Is that, some high number, we could throw out whatever percentage, but some high number, probably most of our listeners don't have the ability to necessarily decide when trees are cut and how trees are cut to daylight the ground. They probably, in many scenarios, they can't burn. And,
they literally feel like they only have access to trapping.
To hunt or trap, yes. And we absolutely recognize and, can appreciate the position that you're in. I hunt leased land. We're going to be burning it soon by working with the landowner to do that. It's a private landowner, so it's not a timber company. So it's a little bit different scenario. But my options are way more limited than they would be if they were if it was my personal property. So we understand and we recognize that, but we also want to make clear, and I actually responded to an email this way, that, our job is also, regardless of the situation that you're in, to put out the information that we know that is as close to the truth as possible. Like, our job is to say what the data say, and then apply that to your specific context, right? And to not pull punches just because we know that a lot of people can't do it.
Right.
But then also, we want this to hopefully carry over to decision makers and land managers.
I was going to say, we have a whole bunch of public landowners out there.
Yes.
That the managers of those places are listening to us. We know that we have several of them.
And so it could help out, hopefully. I mean, that's kind of like pie in the sky goal for us, right? Is to influence those managers as well, so that even if you're a public landowner, that, you're benefiting from it as well. So there's big picture and small picture aspects to all this.
Well, I think that's good. And as we have said all along, we want all that feedback. Sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming. I'm trying to respond to people, as fast as I can, but it's also stimulating content for us, ideas on what we need to do. And what I was going to say earlier, and I kind of ended up on a complete tangent, and then you had a really good line of thinking that you went with right then. What I was trying to get to is we're going to have bonus episodes for a large portion of turkey season. We've got peak interest from our audience in turkey related content. A lot of people are saying we're not putting it out fast enough. That's what they want us to do. But we're getting so much feedback in some of these veins, like the what is brooding cover kind of topic. Also, what you just brought up is another one that we're going to have a bonus episode on, where we try to go through what are your options if you're in that lease land situation. Yeah,
and I made a post about that going into last weekend. And we got overwhelming feedback on ideas of things that people either suggest or have actually put into practice themselves, and in many cases have seen positive responses from. So I'm excited to get into that.
That was really cool to see. You posted that, and we got overwhelming support from our community. People were sharing it all over the place and sharing their ideas in it. And, I think that's a good example of us coming together.
Absolutely.
Like, we're trying to problem solve together, and ultimately we can affect the resource together at a larger scale if we do that.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for that support. And it's going to lead to a lot of content coming up, right now when the turkeys are gobbling. They're gobbling in South Florida right now.
Yeah.
So
a lot of people are going to have windshield time, hopefully, to listen to.
Yeah, I hope so. So what did we learn from these predation episodes? I guess if I'm going to throw the ball to you first, right here, what do you think resonated with you most out of all these episodes?
That while the literature is not clear on turkeys, when it comes to the effectiveness of predator control. There are lots of other species that we can look to for examples of successful predator control. It's not going to be responsible for the majority of the birds that you carry in and of itself. That's going to go back to habitat, but it does appear to, in some cases, provide a somewhat substantial supplement to that habitat management effort that has been implemented. So, I mean, we talked a lot about, and it's hard not to even get into it all again. I don't want to rehash this entire conversation, but
do you want to just replay our episodes for
I'll just hold my phone up to the microphone, right? It has a benefit in some cases.
Yeah.
So I don't think all hope is lost for the people that have no ability to manipulate vegetation conditions. But you just need to temper your expectations accordingly. That's kind of one of my big takeaways from all this. And I want to get down more to the details and discuss some of the high points of these various conversations, but that was one of my key take-home points.
Yeah, and I want to do the same thing, but I think it's good for us to take a step back real quick and just reflect on this. I do think it challenged me big time on where my perspective lies.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you because I can't lose this thought, but where I land on it is I don't want to discourage any of our listeners from trapping. I don't want them to trap in a way that takes away time, money, or other resources from habitat improvements that we know have a high ROI for turkeys.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good take-home message. I'm with you there. And we covered a whole bunch of literature. There's also a lot of literature we didn't cover, or at least we didn't directly. For example, one of the quail studies that was a really well-designed study.
Oh, yeah. I had made a note to talk about this one too.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, good.
So, we keep saying habitat first, predator trapping second, or down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really clear, especially there's some good stuff in quail literature where we have replicated, designed experiments, and it's been done in multiple cases where you show huge effect sizes of habitat and no effect of trapping without the habitat.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do the habitat, you get a big effect size, regardless of if you trap or not. And then if you add trapping into the habitat, you then get that 10, 15, 20% bump. Some cases it's a little higher that Dwayne talked about. And in some cases, even in other parts of the world, the effects of trapping can be relatively large, like manyfold.
Yeah.
I think he said one time it was threefold in one of the studies, but
in studies where they're hunting the birds in fall and winter.
Yeah, and that's an important context. I'm glad you brought that up on the air, because I think that was a really solid point from you. But the other point I don't know that we emphasized enough is that often these studies, the intensity when they're seeing those effects, not only are they in a situation where the habitat is in really good shape, so we've got that out, that hole in the bucket's filled, and it's also often done at such a scale that it's, we talk about having limited access to habitat manipulation. Well, the same is true for trapping.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we've articulated that well the intensity at which some of these things are being done, and at the spatial and temporal scale is not accessible to many of our listeners, we'll just say. Now, another counterpoint that I want to bring up right now, because it's been brought to my attention multiple times. We're not telling you this to discourage you. If that's the only option you have, then please do that. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of reward that, getting involved in what's going on your land, and, the techniques involved. Like, there's a lot to be had with that. But, whether you're a private landowner, you're limited because of whatever, don't be discouraged by that. Think about it in a different way. And I actually said this to a couple of people that reached out. They were like, only got 300 acres or I got 400 acres. And after listening to this, I'm discouraged because I don't think I have enough impact over enough landscape to make a big impact on the bird. And, should essentially, they're kind of almost to the point where it seems like they're discouraged and don't want to do anything. So don't let that, don't let those limitations paralyze you. Instead, let them motivate you. Like, you can be the sentinel. If you're that landowner that has 300 acres and you're doing some things that are really great, use that as an opportunity to get the neighboring landowners on the same page with you.
Show them how you're doing it.
Yeah. Like, get it. And that could be with habitat or trapping or whatever. Use your situation as the opportunity to show people what can be done. And that's the way we really need to go about this. Let's get together rather than it being a tragedy of the commons situation where I'm not going to do it because I can't influence what all my neighbors are doing. Think about it the opposite way of I'm going to do this to try to get them all involved on as well. If we take that way, then we can really move the needle. I think we just have to come together on this.
If you don't let the fact that you don't have 5,000 acres to hunt deter you from turkey hunting, why would you let that fact deter you from trying to help turkey populations?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if we have just a few hundred acres to hunt and maybe one bird that's huntable in that property, in a given season, we still turkey hunt. Mm-hmm. So why, just because it's not as great as it would be if we had 10 times that.
Well, I've had a couple of situations where I had like 15 acres to get after a turkey on. In fact, one of my first turkeys, it was on like a 12 or 13 acre tract, and it just came together.
So, I think we should carry that same mindset into trying to help turkeys too, whether it be through habitat or predator control.
Right.
So,
well, we've been rambling on. So I know that you've got some good stuff detailed. I know you've just taken some notes. So what kind of stuff do you want to dig into, look under the hood at?
One thing that I feel like, just while we're still talking about the really high level topics before we start to get down in the weeds a little bit more so, that I did want to mention is it seemed pretty consistent among some of the things we read and the folks that we interviewed that generally speaking, you're expecting about a 20% increase in abundance from a successful trapping program. Mm-hmm. It seemed like that number came up several times, and maybe that's just a nice round number that we typically land on. Mm-hmm. But
even Dwayne estimated that.
Yeah, he did.
Which that relative effect size, I think he said about 80% of his turkey stuff was coming from habitat, and the other 20% was trapping. Is that what he said?
And to define his habitat management, he talked about silvicultural treatment. So he was thinning, he was getting sunlight to the ground. They were burning, and these patchwork burns. They had areas with different fire frequencies. They were burned on different years, alternating. Yeah. So they had a lot of structural heterogeneity across the ground. They did have some food plots. There was
no supplemental feeding.
There was no supplemental feed. They were controlling invasive herbaceous and woody species.
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
So you're talking about years and years of habitat management work that were the culmination of weeks of work in each of those given years to get to that point that he did with the population before he implemented predator control and saw that additional increase. Mm-hmm. Or at least, I don't want to say he saw that additional increase. He felt strongly that it was likely that additional increase was from the predator control. And one thing that I thought was an interesting note as well is that they continued that for 3 years on his family's property, and they enjoyed that boost throughout that entire 3-year period. But he did say that when they ceased predator control after that time period, that the population went back down to kind of the baseline that was pre-trapping, which to me lends a little bit more credibility to that anecdote. It still is anecdotal data, but it's a stronger anecdote in that sense.
Well, and also like he's a renowned scientist, and he's trying to be objective, and to me that lends a little more credibility to him than just someone that I don't know.
Yes,
because I know that he is very skeptical.
Yes.
And he tried to articulate that as well.
Right.
That, you know, he was skeptical of what was going on. But the other thing I just want to remind the audience, the reason for the skepticism is first of all, we don't have a control, right? We've already talked about a lot, and we're going to talk about a lot more, how variable a population is from year to year.
Mm-hmm.
So there's skepticism linked to that, and we don't have the control to see how things would have changed if we didn't have a treatment, in this case, trapping. So we don't have that design where we can see what nature is doing versus what our action is doing, and also there's no replication. And those are two elements that we really need to isolate a factor like that.
Yeah.
And that's why I would call it healthy skepticism. That is our job as scientists. We're not supposed to be just telling you what our opinion is. We're trying to base it on data like that, and we're trying to articulate when we have skepticism and why.
Yeah.
I just want to make that point strong right there.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job of explaining the value in experimentation and having a control, and especially in this context, it's really helping us control for that cyclical nature of turkey populations, particularly when it comes to reproductive success. But the replication also really helps you understand the transferability of those results to other properties. So, in other words, was there something specifically that was going on Dr. Elmore's family property that made trapping more effective there than it would be somewhere else? We don't really know until that's been well replicated across the landscape to see that same trend holds true in different areas.
Exactly. But we can pretty safely infer, based on a bunch of other literature that we've just beaten this home, hopefully, by now, he probably was set up for success in that scenario because he had done all that habitat work. It was a relatively large property. You know, like he was doing things relatively intensively. So those were all elements. He probably was setting himself up for success.
Yeah. But
he also probably already had more birds than most people do.
Sure.
But he's kind of one of those guys just like us where, you know, unless they're sitting on top of each other, there's not enough of them.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the way I think. So,
but you know, one thing that's funny about this too, and I don't mean this as a slight to anyone, you know, I'm not even close to that. It's just something that I now at this point kind of almost find humorous, because I think of how many times I've been guilty of it myself, not just related to turkey management, but all sorts of things in my life, that rarely do we ever invest time in something that we don't see as being at least fairly successful. And I still am waiting on the day that I have a conversation with a hunter or a manager that has implemented trapping and has told me, I trapped and it didn't do jack shit for my turkey population.
Well, the interesting, so let's think about that a little. That's what you're going to get some negative comments about that.
It won't be the first time.
It's fine. It's fine. I know that not everybody wants to hear everything we have to say. But it is interesting that we cannot consistently, and I'm talking about just in general across all these studies, we cannot consistently show an effect, much less a positive effect. Sometimes it's even negative. We can't even consistently in an experiment show that. But if you talk to people, 100% of the time it's effective.
Yeah, the anecdotal data is batting 1,000.
It is interesting to think about.
Yeah.
And some of these studies, like the ones that you've been a part of with, you know, some of these coyote removal things, it's like, wow, I could not believe so hard, so unintuitive. Is that a word? Unintuitive?
Yeah.
Like, to be operating at that kind of scale with that kind of intensity and then not consistently see a response in a game, you know, like in fawn survival, or like, how is that?
Yeah.
I can't believe it. You know, it's hard to believe, but then it's like, well, the study is solid, but everybody that's trapped some raccoons has success.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know that people are going to be irritated at this. This is not to poke fun or slight, like you said,
It's human nature.
Right. It's sweat equity. I mean, we want it to work.
Yeah.
So, but it is interesting for you to think about that. And we're not here to just tell everybody what they want to hear. Some things are hard to hear. And I'll add again, when we're talking to some of these other people, some of that stuff is hard for me to hear because it's not in line with the way I'm thinking about it either sometimes. So, we're in the same boat on that.
Well, can I throw one back at you?
One what?
Question.
Yeah.
Should we be trapping coons or coyotes?
Ooh. Before we talked to Brett about that, I did bring up, I've been wondering about the coyotes.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a message right now that I have not answered yet. Someone asked me about this and I just hadn't gotten to it yet. I saw it. But they were concerned about that issue after listening to everybody, And some people kind of articulate, it's like, I'm confused. I don't know what to do now. It's like, well, that's kind of the point of giving you all these different perspectives is we're trying to collate that now into something that is usable for you. And I honestly, on that front, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying that is, what Dr. Collier was bringing to the table was a perspective that was very unpopular, but it's very challenging. And sometimes those are the kinds of ideas that really make us take a step back and realize assumptions that we've been making.
And just in case you didn't listen to that episode,
need to be challenged.
And just in case you didn't listen to that episode, he was asserting that a lot of the nest predation events that we blame on, mesopredators like raccoons is actually incident to a predation event on the hen. And so thereby it turns that raccoon coming along after the fact into a scavenger.
Yeah.
And the two main adult hen predators are in at least, most of the wild turkeys range are going to be foxes and coyotes coyotes and bobcats and to a lesser extent foxes. Mm-hmm. And that those nest predation events would not occur without those larger predators coming along first.
Well, yeah, and there's multiple points here that I think are really important to challenge you to think about. One, he was talking exactly as you just said. We don't know what proportion of the nest predations that we've associated with these smaller carnivores like raccoons. They're always the number one. We don't know what proportion of them are actually scavenging events where something has pushed the hen off or eaten the hen even. Mm-hmm. Like a coyote eats the hen or a hunter pushes the hen off the nest and then the scavenger comes in and grabs the eggs or she abandons it for some reason. We don't know what proportion. I think you asked him directly and he said we don't know that proportion. Mm-hmm. But he said that based on a lot of his work, and I think he's working on something based on what he was indicating, they're trying to work out what proportion are we misassigning. Because if a hunter comes through and bumps a hen off and she abandons the nest and then a raccoon eats those eggs, that is not predation.
Right.
Those eggs are failed.
Yeah.
They're already done anyway.
And I really think his main point was to challenge us to think on an additional
that's
deeper
what I'm
layer
saying.
on
He's
this.
really shaking it up, and he's not ready to present data necessarily showing that we've gotten it all wrong all this time. Mm-hmm. But he is challenging us to take a step back and think about that assumption and whether or not it's valid. And I think I really appreciate that a lot. So the other thing that it dawned on me, and I don't think I've even talked to you about this, even though we've talked about it a bunch of times, a lot of the nest predation literature is from simulated nests. Mm-hmm. That is a nest that essentially what you're simulating is a nest that was abandoned.
Yeah.
And in all those studies, you really are capturing scavenging much more closely than you would be representing a hen on a nest that gets predated.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of literature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of those indicate, the smoking gun for raccoons, but they're scavenging the eggs because it's just a nest that doesn't have a hen defending it.
Right.
So think about that. I think that's important. But to go back to your original question, which one should you trap? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe both of them. Maybe neither of them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And here's the thing that's perplexing to me about it too, and we were having a conversation earlier today over lunch with another colleague about this, is that if we know that a hunter walking by a turkey nest can potentially lead to her nest abandonment, then why wouldn't we also expect, being repeatedly harassed by a raccoon? I mean, that seems like a higher threshold of disturbance, the raccoon does, than a hunter walking by.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't that lead to some pretty high rates of nest abandonment? We clearly have some anecdotal examples of them staying in place and successfully hatching that clutch and rearing that brood.
Yeah.
But is that the exception or is that the norm? We don't really know.
Well, and that's a good point too, because the ultimate fate of the nest is the same in that scenario. So in other words, if a raccoon comes by and bothers a hen until she finally is like, you know what, I can't take this anymore. And then she leaves the nest. Then the next time the raccoon comes by, there's a bunch of eggs there. It eats them. We technically scavenge those, but it also caused the abandonment. So that's really the predation part of it. Whether it's predation or abandonment doesn't matter in that case, because the same fate is the outcome, right?
Yeah.
That this a lost nest. However, if we're talking about the coyote versus raccoon thing, if a coyote eats the hen and then we say, oh, the nest was lost because this raccoon came and ate all the eggs, that is a big difference. And it makes a big difference in when you're trying to address it, because you can trap every raccoon on the planet, that nest was still failed because of something else.
Yeah.
And she also could abandon it for other reasons that aren't even related to predation. So
another thing that really concerns me about that is you've lost her lifetime, her remaining lifetime reproduction.
So that's a huge effect if the hen is lost because of that lifetime, which I think in one of the episodes you articulated really well. Another thing, I don't want to lose this because I never hear this come up, and it's going to be another one of those sound bites that probably upset some people. If human hunting is bumping hens, like I've bumped a hen off a nest. I mean, most people who have turkey hunted a lot have done that. But most of the hunting effort, and we've seen this over and over in studies all over the place, most of the hunting effort is occurring in the first couple of weeks of season. Well, if we move the season back such that it coincides with peak nesting, now the peak hunting activity coincides with peak nesting. I've never heard anybody talk about the potential, especially in really high intensity hunting areas, of us bumping hens more commonly, which then make them vulnerable to this stuff based on what Brett was saying. Like, that's a logical step. And I've never heard anybody talk about potential for the moving season dates to be negative.
Yeah.
It's always like, well, we're moving them to, address this other hypothesis.
To decrease disruption to reproductive activities.
Decrease disruption of the mating system, which we've had a whole series. If you didn't listen to that, we went through it. We did the same thing where we got a lot of scientists in. We covered 2 really great experiments on it. But I've never heard anybody, and I thought Brett was going to take that step, and he didn't quite when we kind of got toward the end of the episode. But that was one I was kind of wanting to ask him that question, and we just kind of didn't get to it. But that was the thing that popped into my head. It's like, wait, if something bumping the hen is leading to this nest loss, and then we move all of the hunting activity, so there's much higher interaction potential of the hunting with nesting, are we going to see a higher abandonment or scavenging or predation or whatever the loss is? Doesn't matter to me. Are we going to see more nest loss because of that change? And I've never heard anyone address that.
Yeah. I mean, that's something you and I have been discussing a lot over the past couple of weeks. And although I think it's worthy of looking into further, one piece of evidence that we do have to address that comes from the University of Tennessee study that we discussed with Craig Harper. And while they didn't see lower nest success rates in those counties where they moved the date back, as you would expect if this mechanism was in operation. There are other potential confounding factors there. So
they also didn't see an increase.
They didn't see an increase either.
They didn't see any change.
It could be that there was a benefit of, decreasing disruption to mating, but that was offset by losing nest to abandonment. But this is
complete
pure speculation at this point.
I knew what you were going to say.
It was just something that was intriguing enough that we felt we should address it.
Yeah, and we should talk through these different ideas. We don't have any data. There's no clear evidence that we can find showing that moving the season dates has led to an increase in any of the vital rates of the Mississippi and Tennessee study. But, based on what Brett was presenting, I could see that as being one plausible hypothesis. Is like, well, maybe we did decrease the disruption of the breeding, but we had a commensurate increase in the disruption of nesting.
Yeah.
It's like,
that's super complicated.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back to a place where my simple mind can operate and, kind of wrapping this thing up. I mean, I think to address concerns from both sides, whether raccoons and opossums, the ones we typically think about, are responsible for the majority of nest loss, or if it is in fact the larger predators because they're pushing the hen off or eating her. If I'm going to trap to try to benefit turkeys, I'm going to trap them all.
Mm-hmm.
That's
everything.
Bottom line. I'm going to have, depending on property size, I'm going to have a handful of DPs, dog-proof traps, and I'm going to have a handful of foothold traps. But I'm going to be trapping across the spectrum.
I'll tell you another thing that I'm going to do. If I have the opportunity, I'm going to make sure that there's some damn good places to nest.
Mm-hmm.
There's damn good places to raise a poult. And I'm going to make sure those are prevalent.
Yeah.
And then add the trapping on top of it.
Absolutely. And, one thing I did right before we recorded is I went back and I was hitting some of the highlights with our episode with Dwayne, because it's been a while since we recorded that when the others were fresher on my mind. But his trapping intensity, as far as, as people are thinking about what would this look like on my piece of property, my piece of dirt where I've got permission or whatever, was about 1 trap per 15 acres for 2 to 3 weeks each year.
So does that work out to 1 per acre? 1 trap night per acre? Is that what you said?
I don't know. You're the quantitative expert here.
You said he had 1 trap in 15 acres for 15 nights.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing as those historical studies.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily, that doesn't mean that you're going to realize those benefits at that intensity, or that you can't or don't need to be more intensive. That's just what that happens to work out with
I would scale my trap density up on smaller properties.
Yes.
And down on larger ones, because you're controlling less of an area. It's more affordable to run a trap per se, taking that down from 15 acres to, 5 acres or even like 2 acres. It's affordable to do that. And especially if that's the only activity that you can implement to manage turkeys on your property, go all in on it.
Yeah, do it hard.
And one of the things that I recently heard on, I was actually listening to an episode of the Gamekeepers podcast that was related to this, and I thought it was a really good idea. And I also got a couple listeners that mentioned to me that they did this is throughout deer season when they're going to deer camp for the weekend, and then continuing even on through turkey season when they're going to be at their property or their farm or their camp over the weekend, they're taking traps with them. And especially it's easy with dog-proof traps. And, they get there on a Friday evening and they'll go out and put out, 10, 15 traps or whatever. And then they'll go hunt in the morning, especially if it's turkey season, you're done pretty early, and then they go run their traps. And so that is maximizing the efficiency of your time while you're out on the property too.
Yeah. So one other thing, just to let the audience know, I'm not ready to leave this alone.
No.
And I don't want to have to lean on a bunch of other game birds. I mean, Dwayne said I don't want to have to go into a red grouse study to tell you about what you should expect from trapping with turkeys.
Yeah. A red grouse study where they're killing avian predators too.
Yes. So you and I have been working with a potential place where we might be able to get at this basically and put it as close to bed as you can put it.
Yeah.
Like, what could you potentially get out of if you were the best trapper there was and you got rid of everything basically that you can legally?
Predator-free zone.
You create this predator-free zone. How does that compare to an area where you don't do anything? And we have an opportunity to do that, and we're just trying to work out how we're going to fund it.
Mm-hmm.
We've mentioned it potentially to TFT, but we have access, and the lead researcher over it has agreed that they'd like to collaborate with us on it, where we have 4 predator exclosures, where they're excluding essentially all the mammalian predators.
Right.
Avian predators could still get in, so you can't trap those anyway.
And they're 100 acres each.
Yeah, and they're about 100 acres, which is commensurate with a lot of our landowner base, what the scale they can operate at. And then we have a control that just has predators like normal.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an opportunity to potentially compare nesting success inside and outside those predator-free zones, which would get us at least the endpoints. Like, if you were perfect at it versus didn't do anything, how far are those apart? And then we'll see, basically the endpoints of that expectation.
And these sites have
have
some pretty good nesting habitat too.
It's open stands with high fire frequency, so really, really good stuff for a turkey to nest in. But like, that study is what's needed for us to really move the needle on our knowledge for that, for turkey specifically.
And one of the other
really exciting opportunity, and maybe we can figure out a way to crowdsource it, or go through one of these organizations or whatever. But we're working on trying to get you that data.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've even discussed as far as adding an even additional element to that is having some 100-acre blocks that are unfenced, where we're trapping at this level of intensity that we've discussed today.
Exactly.
To see what that middle ground looks like too.
Right. So basically, if you do nothing, here's where you're at. If you were perfect and got rid of everything, here's where you'd be at. And then if you intensively trap, here's how close you can get to the predator-free zone with intensive trapping at that scale. So very important, and I'm excited that we have that opportunity. If we can figure out how to bring it to everybody, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
But really exciting stuff.
I can't wait to watch this thing develop.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I think we got to go listen to a talk now.
Yeah, we got to go learn.
We got to go learn something else. And
it's actually a habitat study. It's great.
I just want to take a second and say thank you to all of our listeners.
Yes.
The support has been overwhelmingly positive.
Yes.
And it's been frequent and intensive, and just like your trapping program should be. And your and your habitat management. I'm not leaving habitat management behind.
Yes. Let me say habitat
trapping
first.
Yes.
And then trapping.
And
I like that.
And all of the reviews that you guys have been leaving have been amazing.
Well, you know what? Even when we were getting negative comments, you guys are sticking with us.
Yeah.
Like, you're realizing what we're trying to do and embracing that. And we've even had some reviews that are kind of negative, and we still got a 5-star, which is crazy to me.
Apparently some people don't appreciate my jokes.
Yeah, you're really, really bad humor.
My kids don't either, so you're in good company.
So, yeah, thank you all so much. If you haven't had a chance to rate the podcast, take a couple seconds when you get done listening and do that. We really appreciate it. All the feedback has been phenomenal. And thanks for sticking with us, even though we're covering controversial topics and we're giving points of view that may not fit yours. We really appreciate all the support. We're trying to bring it all to you right here. So thanks, everybody.
Exactly. Thank you all so much.
Wild Turkey Science is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network and is made possible by Turkeys for Tomorrow, a grassroots organization dedicated to the wild turkey. To learn more about TFT, check out turkeysfortomorrow.org.